Hi. We're rolling, and I'm going to you, Tom.
It is October 3rd. Welcome to the 27th episode of Dogs Without Cabins. Maybe it's not the 27th episode. Maybe it's only the 3rd. I think it's actually the 5th. I'm not sure. But years ago, I'd say in the early 1990s, I did a newsletter called Dogs Without Cars. You can see them here. It's folded 8.5 by 11. Ran them on the copier after hours at work. And as a regular MTC rider, I would leave these on seats at bus stops and on benches throughout the Twin Cities. And the thrust of it, and you can't read it, and I'm not going to read it to you, is that this was controlled circulation. And that if you left me $2 on your bus seat, I would somehow get that $2 and deliver your regular copy to your seat so you could pick it up in the AM. So that was the surreal or absurdist setup for it. I did a total only of 9 issues, but I made it a point that the first issue, much like how I introduced this episode, was number 2, so that I could reference things that happened in number 1 that didn't happen at all, which included surveying everybody on the MTC bus. I left out 10,000 surveys, by the way, and only got 2 responses. And I would ask them if you could fly, would that be better than the bus? If you can mail yourself to work, would it be more comfortable than the bus? And then I would print the results. And of the 2 people who responded, in my posted results, of course, it was evenly split. But I went to great lengths to make everything authentic. You could tell. Looks like a bus pass. I'm not going to try and show you these things. I have a map on the back of one of them showing route changes in the Sahara Desert in 1870. So you can see a caravan trail, a controlled trail slightly paved outside of Cairo, and also where the 18B would go on Sundays. So welcome to Dogs Without. Oh, no more buses? Well, now they don't even have cabins. Our first guest today is really an extraordinary fellow, and I don't know the correct things about him because I don't accumulate data and bios, and I'm not on Facebook, and I don't go to Wikipedia. But I do know that Danny Klecko, or just Klecko, the baker, was at that St. Agnes booth as a member of the State Fair Foundation, that St. Agnes booth at the State Fair for like 400, 500, 600 demonstrations. He's a great baker. He's baked for Reagan. Oh, remember when Reagan was frightening? He baked for Gorbachev, and I know he had a fellowship to Russia at some time where apparently they just sent him to Siberia. He can mention his excellent chapbook, and I think it's hit maker, candlestick maker, poet, something like that, and it is a wonderful book. Our first guest, Danny Klecko.
I think what Tom forgot to mention is I'm pretty much a big deal. So just go with that when I read what I'm here to talk about tonight. We're living in the midst of COVID, and I'm really appreciative that Tom's put this out during the COVID era. I don't like people getting sick or anything like that, but I tell you, I kind of like the fact that you can't be with me. And so for the last 7 or 8 months, I've been by myself road tripping across America working on a new book called Lincoln Land. And I'm not going to get into explain it, but I will say I've been driving to different places across primarily the Midwest looking at different monuments that celebrate Lincoln and some of his achievements. I drove to Council Bluffs, where you may or may not know, is the farthest west that Lincoln ever got while being in America. I went to Troy, Kansas, where Lincoln almost froze to death when he went to lecture to 40 people about why it wasn't good to have slavery. I went to Claremont, Iowa, where David Lynch filmed The Straight Story, the guy with the tractor, if you remember that. And it was interesting. But what a lot of people don't know is obviously Lincoln had never come to Minnesota, but he was the first president that the state of Minnesota ever carried. And although he was never here, he has some pretty strong connections, one of which was obviously in Mankato. It was the largest mass execution in the history of our nation to this day. He signed off on it. 38 Dakota warriors were hung there. And also in Columbia Heights, well, when Lincoln died, they took his body and they put it in this train, and the train was akin to Air Force One, and they shipped it all the way to Springfield, Illinois. And it was a tour. I mean, it was a huge, huge deal. And when the tour was over, they took the boxcar and Funeral Train 1. After President Lincoln was assassinated, his body was repaired, placed in a train, and shipped from D.C. to Springfield, Illinois. Like a rock band, the train stopped at numerous destinations for thousands and thousands of mourners. Like a rock band, Lincoln's body traveled in style. The train was equivalent to Air Force One. A team of 300 people accompanied the body at all times. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Funeral Train 2. When the tour ended, the railroad card shuffled ownerships between military and railroad companies. Eventually, it was purchased by Mr. Lowry and stored close to me in Columbia Heights, Minnesota. Lowry intended to refurbish the car and send it back on tour for all America to see. But then he died. Thank you. Funeral Train 3. The relic somehow fell into the hands of a female civic group who got the car into touring order, returned to former splendor. But months before setting out, mysteriously, a prairie fire swept, destroying this wonderful heirloom. This morning, I walked the neighborhood. The internet claimed the car's final site wasn't far from 37th and Jackson. Thank you. And now, oh, stop. You're too kind. Now, for the conclusion, Funeral Train 4. At sunup, I called out to the spirits, asking them to send a sign while noticing 37th divides, cracker box houses, bad lawns, and rusty cars. This space, the quiet energy, reminded me of a Steinbeck novel. Very working class. Across the street, I saw bougie houses, splendid gardens, gas-efficient vehicles. Then, the sun lifted. The ghost stirred, giving me a message. But that's a story for another day. My name's Danny Klecko. I'm a big deal. Good night.
Yes, Danny Klecko, the big deal. Here's a picture of a wonderful writer who is sadly not doing well, named Charlie Fowler. Lives in Morris, Minnesota. And I'm going to read a poem by him and say, "Hello, Charlie, get better." It's called Imagine If You Will. One warm Saturday, but we play indoors. We balance all our chairs in the stairwell and at the bottom of the stair and cover with a blanket to make a house. I reach around in the pantry for little pies, cherry, pecan, and what's this? Did you bring the Bismarcks? Oh, and here's a tin of oysters. I turned out Dad's Madeira, but you were feeling more mature and made coffee. It was very warm in our little house, not enough room to swing a kite. You smiled at me a little shyly, and then we held hands and pretended it was cold out, and it was. We were so very young and in love, so much younger than today. The next guest is Paula Reed Nancarrow, and I don't remember how long I've known you, Paula. I'm guessing 12 years, maybe a bit longer, maybe it was 2 weeks. Oh, it's all so baffling. Writer, consultant, performer, grant writer, performed all around and outside of the Twin Cities. Oh, and she's a wonderful poet. And it's I didn't know that for so many years. Just a wonderful poet. And she was in a bunch of fringe festivals, one time at Patrick's Cabaret when I was the house manager the entire week. And so I got to see the show she did with Lauren Nemi 5 times. And right around the 3rd time, I started, getting what it was all about. Paula Reed Nancarrow.
Thanks, Tom. I'm honored to be in this basement in the company of a couple of published poets, especially Danny Klecko, who I already knew was a really big deal, and since I am not one. But unless YouTube counts as publication, which last time I checked it didn't, but Cheap Theater has my address if the royalty checks start coming in. It was quite an experience to go over the poems scattered in various places on my computer and try to figure out what themes emerged and what would be a good set for this taping. I decided I'd begin and end with a poem that addresses the times we're living in now and fill in the middle with a few I find personally significant and hope that the basement can relate to. The first poem was written in early spring of this year. It is called Credo for a Pandemic. I believe that the house finch, orange cap and breast lifted each morning to call to its mate in the fir tree, holds for safekeeping my memory of love. I believe in walking around the marshy lake of Loring Park in the evening and watching, week by week, the goslings grow. I believe in the red epaulettes flashing on the wings of blackbirds, in their sharp check notes descending with the sun, in not counting the ways to look at them, in not counting points to redemption in order to fly home or to be delivered from sin. I believe in the salvation of armies converting swords into plowshares, in the sanctification of noticing what is. And if I once thought that human beings were the only creatures who could give and receive forgiveness, believe me, my friend, I am thinking this over again.
Nice.
Thank you. The next poem is titled Lenses, and it's in 3 biographical sections. I need to say right off, while I recognize that the lens with which we look at our identity, our roles, and our privileges within it is a critical topic of conversation about social justice right now, this is largely a poem that treats themes very much on the periphery of that discussion, and it is comparatively lightweight. Lenses. 1. The first pair I wore, finally at 15, lay hard but permeable against each tortured eye for 2 hours before I could focus on the Sunday comics. Blondie, it seemed, was going shopping. Dagwood was making a sandwich. I was going to be kissable. And then the braces came. 2. That windy day, I picked up the rejection letter from Yale. Crossing the quadrangle of St. Bonaventure University, my right lens popped out into the grass. "Pray to St. Anthony," offered Father Leo as I sifted through grass with the envelope. Already I saw St. Anthony could not address this loss. 3. "Presbyopia," she said, and smiled. "Old eyes, you have a lot of options." We tried them all. Monocorrection, one eye for distance, one for close-up. Reading glasses St. Anthony kept stealing for himself. And finally, multifocals, which means it's up to me now to put my old eyes wherever I think they belong. Thank you. This next poem was written in response to a prompt from Diego Vasquez. Hi, Diego. In my writers group, which used to meet at his apartment on the west side in St. Paul, and which now meets, like everyone else, meets on the set of the Hollywood Squares. I'll let you decide how it lines up with the rest. The title keeps changing. Right now it's called Reentry. No one tells you that wrinkles and age spots will hide childhood scars, that the white triangle which split your bottom lip, making it mirror Cupid's bow, the trace of a 4-year-old's stitches, will thin as your lips get thinner, so that you risk forgetting what it felt like to have your father spin an aluminum saucer round and round on its tow rope over the ice, covering the backyard pond while you grip the cloth handles, screaming, in fear and in glee. You risk forgetting what it felt like to have his hands release you into space only to hit a meteor hidden beneath the white snowbank. You risk not being surprised at the amount of blood that could spill from your own small body, even when your father did not mean to hurt you. And you risk forgetting what it was like to be held in what was left of your pregnant mother's lap all the way to the hospital. And no one tells you that this is not your first scar, which came from the cutting of the cord, that all first scars are umbilical, and that you have already forgotten what it felt like when you were first cast into the universe, and that your father's grand gesture of release was already late in the game. No one can tell you that the slow work of time upon the quilted skin will soften all the darned patches, or that in the end you will offer up all the work of your engrailed genes to re-enter the fecund darkness. Because love allows this. Because love allows even this. The next 2 poems are about my mom, and the first one is actually the poem that Tom told me he wanted to publish in a chapbook before all the projects got sidelined. So I think right now it's the oldest poem I'm reading. It was written at the beginning of her Alzheimer's diagnosis, and it's called The Names of Birds. My mother and the birds, we watched them at the feeder. I call out their names. "Look, Mom, the blue jay's back. That one," she says, "that one." And the red-headed woodpecker, "Such a big nose thing. Yes, he has a long beak." And there are the chickadees, the little nuthatches, and the turtle doves, gray and homely, their sound all the beauty they own. Then the red-winged blackbird, "Mom, look, they're a sign of spring that will never," she says. "Oh yes, my love." And the robin, too, "It will come, you will see it." All the names she has forgotten I recite like a litany, a prayer to the birds, distinct and various as the language slipping away. Goodbye to winged words. I say the names of birds, she does not repeat them, nor do I ever hear the name I own. This next poem is a poem I wrote after my mother's death in 2019, and it owes part of its inspiration to a story I told about a magic book at the Black Forest in honor of the publication of a book of Jack Zipes, and another part of its inspiration to a dear storytelling friend of mine, Anne Ray, who is a bit of a magical creature herself, and who lit a candle for me every time I went on what we called my caretaking vacation. And when I went home for my mother's funeral as well, and also to a wonderful website called the Feather Atlas. Invocation. Then the book of feathers on your coffee table took flight. On mine, it was a different story. How did I not know that Audubon killed the birds before he painted them? No human law was broken when he did so. But your book is the bird of Frankenstein, an illegal assemblage of molted feathers sewn into a binding soft as a living thing. And when my mother's last breath left her body far across the country, you lit a candle as you said you would. Then your strange bird book fell open, and the woven feathers of crow and jay, nuthatch and hawk, eagle and killdeer, raven and wren rose into wings and carried her into the night. How are we doing for time? I have 2 more. Is that okay? Okay. This is a poem for my son who got married a couple weeks ago after in the backyard of his brother-in-law after a delay like many young people had this year. Morning coffee. In the bungalow where your dad and I slept on the ground floor, I would rise with care so the old farm bedstead did not creak, take my coffee on the back porch, relish the few quiet moments I'd have to myself that day before I had to put on all my rolls, the way Heidi must climb the mountain in dress over dress over dress. I might sit 10 minutes before a thud on the ceiling above me signaled you sensed awake energy, and I knew you could beat your sister to it. Then I would swallow my solitude with the scalding caffeine, hearing your feet on the stairs rushing boy forward into the open day. I'd sigh and put my book away. And there you were, blonde as my own childhood, hazel eyes singing like wrens, wearing that blue reunion t-shirt that came almost down to your knees with your cartoon pop-up on it. You'd climb into my lap, lay your head in the curve beneath my shoulder, and we would be quiet together. Once I looked down on those small legs dangling on either side of mine while the coffee cooled. Remember this always, I thought. So far, so good. Though now you are tall and your hair dark and your legs are hairy like Esau's, now I lean my head against your shoulder. All my rolls lay folded between tissues in the dresser. Now no one I love sleeps upstairs or ever interrupts my coffee. Last poem. The last poem is called Mackerel Sky, which is not the sky that's on the screen, but and it starts with an epigraph and a folk saying. So, yeah. Mackerel sky, never long wet, never long dry. A mackerel sky can be used to forecast weather, but it is at the more challenging end of the weather lore spectrum. The simple bit is this: a mackerel sky of any kind means change is likely. Tristan Gooley, The Natural Navigator. Birds open the day for business. The sky is not intended for fish. Morning clouds in long lines move across downtown toward St. Anthony Falls. Scaled gray underbellies illuminated by the rising sun skim office towers and high-risers, avoid the light display on the Target building where the pufferfish in the now faint aquarium keeps blowing itself up. The clouds head off to be fog on the Mississippi, condense into what will soon be the steamy air. For now, it is cool. Bird song sweeps the sidewalks. A rabbit scuttles under the iron fence to loot my neighbor's lettuce. No sirens. On the balcony, I watch fish swim in the sky as if they owned it. Treetops wave like jazz hands. A man at the bus stop lifts a mask from his fast food uniform, clouding his singular face. Thank you all.
Excellent. Paula, would you please get your jacket so people can see that once again you won the dress-up competition? I tried as hard as I could with the Polygamy Porter t-shirt from Park City, Bring Some Home for the Wives. But invariably, huh?
Thank you.
How about
Over
that?
here.
I mean, classed up the entire enterprise. And now it's not just dogs without cabins. These are pedigree dogs.
Okay,
without
all right.
cabins. It's very nice stuff.
Thank you.
Danny, why wasn't it Hitman, Baker, Poet? Was the poet thing just too much?
Yeah, because no one gives a shit about poets.
There you go. No one gives a shit about poets, and that is the theme. We'd have that as a tagline of the show. Well, definitely Casket Maker is more honorable, I would think. I did have another question, too. Do you know where the Lincoln train is now?
Yeah, it's not around. It was burnt alive in that fire.
Oh, I see. So there were other trains that were made to tour the country so people could pay respect and tribute, but they were not that train.
There was one train in particular, and it burnt up in Columbia Heights. So now there's some guy in Arizona, some college professor.
Cranking them out?
Went to great lengths to do a replication, but...
Okay, because I know they had one at the Railroad Museum in Duluth that Hamill said he didn't see it, but if that's on tour
too. That was the guy from Arizona who made that. Yeah.
Okay.
But he got the window frame. He purchased the window frame from an artist for an obscene amount of money, so he can claim that it's authentic.
All right, okay. Thus the confusion, and thus history gone awry yet again. This piece is called Employee of the Month, and I wrote this 21 years ago, and it's a little depressing to realize that it's essentially the same poem I just wrote again recently about being unhappy as a worker of the world, and it's called Employee of the Month. I crawl across nice new anger-absorbent carpet to find an inhaler, to find painkillers, to find something hard enough to hammer through the window that serves someone else 24 hours a day by not opening or closing for us. My exposed left forearm and back and forth face scrape against stain-resistant industrial strength, fully guaranteed floor covering in a way that makes the filaments feel like whiskers and arm stubble. I could drag myself faster if my right wrist didn't scream and if my left wrist worked at all. I could inch ahead more easily if my stomach wasn't bleeding from the awful coffee, always in the personalized water bowl the company gave me for 20 consecutive years of suicide-free service. But what's the use of griping? The thing of it is, the silver lining is I get to see up close the wall to lung to wall to cortex grayish blue carpet, hundreds of little color specks therein. A dot of red, a touch of yellow, a bit of green, like the insides of your eyeballs after rubbing them too hard, which I do a lot these days because of monitors and Merrimack, stupid products, stupid facts, and all the glowing stuff that stares us down. I hum when I crawl, but I can't hear what. And I hate to admit this, but I probably could crawl faster if I spent less time humming and more time scraping my face along the carpeting. It's blood-resistant, too. One of the team trainers, who carries a stun gun and a whip, walks in, pours several thousand tacks, red ants, nettles, and burrs all around me on the floor. I need these alphabetized interview and singing in Chinese by Friday. Can you do it? And of course I say, of course, because I can. After chewing a hole through my cheek, I'm called to the office where the boss tells me to look out across an only somewhat bloodied meadow. There's a message for you up there in that cloud, he says, and sure enough, right on that cloud in rainbow script it says, you are Employee of the Month. I smile and see the boss smile too. He says, just look at what we've done. Thank you for watching Dogs Without Cabins. Thank you to Hamill Griffin-Cassidy, who's making this not green behind me, Paula Nancarrow, and Danny Klecko. Watch for other episodes. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Yeah, nice work, everybody.
And that's a wrap.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to say that's a wrap, so we know.
Oh, that's a wrap.
Oh, yeah, I'll let you know.
Have it, Trello. He'll leave that on the soundtrack. You will, won't you?
I think so.
Just do that.
Okay, we're gonna be clear.